The wind cut across the kingdom like a sharpened blade, carrying with it the bitter taste of frost and the low hum of distant wolves. Snow lay thick across the valleys, blanketing the villages in silence, and the castle loomed atop its icy cliff, its dark towers piercing the gray sky. Within those walls, a legacy of power and fear had settled like frozen stone. The young bride stepped from the carriage, her cloak heavy with snow, her heart racing. She had traveled far from her village, summoned to wed the Alpha King of this frozen realm. Her hands trembled, though not entirely from the cold. Stories of the king's ruthlessness and unyielding rule had reached even the most distant corners of the kingdom. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a thread of curiosity, a strange pull she could not name. The castle gates opened silently, as if the stone itself recognized her arrival. She followed the black-armored guards through halls lined with frozen tapestries depicting kings and queens from centuries past, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. The air smelled faintly of firewood and old stone, and she shivered despite the warmth of her cloak. A voice broke the silence. It was low, soft, yet edged with command. "You have come," it said. She turned to see him. The Alpha King. His figure was tall, imposing, yet there was something almost fragile in the way he stood, as if each breath weighed upon him. His eyes, dark and sharp, held 1,000 winters within them, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees tremble. "You are young," he said, and there was no question in his tone, only observation, sharp and final. "I am," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He stepped closer, his boots silent against the stone floor. The flicker of torchlight caught the edge of his sword, yet it was his gaze that felt like the real weapon. When he whispered her fate, it was a sound colder than the wind outside. "In the next 10 winters, you will give me 10 sons." The words hit her like ice. She blinked, her mind struggling to comprehend. 10 winters, 10 sons. Fear curled like smoke in her chest. But it was not the only feeling. There was awe, a strange fascination that made her pulse quicken. He was a man of power, of command, yet beneath it all, there was a vulnerability she could sense, though she could not explain why. I will try," she whispered, not knowing if she spoke to herself or to him. "Try?" he repeated, the faintest shadow of a smile brushing his lips. "This is not a request, child. This is your life." His tone was heavy, filled with an authority that allowed no argument. She swallowed hard. Her life, her choices seemed to have already been made for her. Yet, a small spark of defiance stirred within her. She would not simply be a pawn in a frozen game of lineage and power. She would survive, she would endure, and perhaps she dared not think it yet she would change him. The king turned and led her through the halls, past doors of iron and windows frosted with patterns like frozen lace. They came to a chamber at the far end of the castle. It was a room unlike any she had imagined. Portraits of children lined the walls, faces both angelic and sorrowful. Some were painted in bright colors, others in somber tones, yet all bore the same haunting eyes that seemed to tell stories of lives lost and winters endured. "They were mine," the king said, voice barely more than a murmur. "They did not survive the curse. None have." The bride's stomach clenched. The weight of his words pressed down on her, heavier than the thickest cloak. A curse. Children who could not live. Each winter was a battle. A trial she had been forced into before she had even set foot in this castle. The truth of her union lay not just in love or power, it lay in survival, in a challenge older than her own years. I will do everything I can," she said, her hands tightening on her cloak. She did not yet know how she could face such a fate, but she could not show weakness now. Not to him, not to herself. The king studied her. And for a moment, the ice seemed to crack around him. She saw a flash of something human in his gaze. Doubt. Longing. Regret. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the stern authority that had earned him the title of Alpha King. "You will learn," he said, more to himself than to her. You will learn the weight of winters and of blood. The bride nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. She followed him deeper into the castle, where shadows stretched long, and the air grew colder. Yet, amidst the chill, she felt something else, an unspoken connection, fragile but undeniable. In the quiet of the castle halls, she sensed that they were not merely king and bride, but two souls caught in the same web of destiny, bound by forces older than either could name. As they passed a narrow staircase, she paused. Something drew her attention to a small, hidden door, partially concealed by frost-covered ivy. Curiosity overcame caution. She reached out, brushing the ivy aside, revealing a keyhole carved with strange runes. Her fingers tingled as if touched by magic. The king's voice startled her. "Do not touch that." She turned, heart hammering, and saw him standing in the shadows, eyes dark as midnight. There was a warning there, yes, but also a thread of something softer. Something she could not yet understand. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Memories," he said simply. "Of those who came before you. Of winters they could not survive. Of choices made, and regrets buried in snow." A chill ran down her spine. She realized, with a mixture of dread and fascination, that her life in this castle was only beginning. The whispers of the past, the weight of a curse, and the command of the Alpha King were now woven into the fabric of her existence. Yet, even in fear, a strange courage sparked. She was not merely a bride to be commanded. She would face the winters, the curse, and the king himself. She would endure. She would survive. And perhaps, in time, she would awaken something in him that no frost, no curse, could ever freeze. The king stepped closer, his breath fogging in the icy air of the hall. He reached out not to touch her, but as if offering an unspoken truce. "Winter is coming," he said, "and with it, your destiny." Her gaze met his, and in that moment, the walls of stone and ice seemed to melt away. For the first time, she sensed not just fear, but the weight of possibility. The castle was no longer just a place of command and control, it was a crucible, and they were both bound to be tested. As the torches flickered, shadows stretching long and dark across the hall, she heard a faint, sorrowful sound, like a child crying somewhere deep within the walls. Her pulse quickened. She realized then that the king's past, and the curse that had claimed so many, was not a tale for her to hear only once. It was a shadow that would follow her through every winter to come. And yet, despite the fear, despite the chilling command whispered to her by the Alpha King, a single thought held her heart fast. She would meet this destiny head-on. She would learn the winters, she would endure the trials, and perhaps, in time, she could uncover the man behind the crown and the curse. She did not see the glint in the king's eyes, a mixture of admiration and warning. As he turned away, the corridors stretched endlessly, the shadows deeper than ever before, and somewhere, beyond the stone walls and the frost, the portrait eyes of children long lost seemed to watch, waiting for her to take the first step into her new life. The bride tightened her cloak, drew in a steadying breath, and followed the king. She did not yet know what the winters would demand of her, but she would not run. Not yet. Not ever. And as the wind howled against the towers and snow swirled like silver flames outside the castle, a voice echoed in her mind, soft but clear. "You have come. But will you survive?" The door to the hidden chamber creaked open, revealing a darkness deeper than the night. She stepped forward, and for the first time, she felt the weight of the winters settle on her shoulders. The first winter had begun. The castle seemed alive at night, as though the stones themselves whispered secrets. Snow pressed against the tall windows like pale fingers, and shadows moved in the flickering torchlight. The young bride, now more familiar with the vast halls, walked cautiously, her mind spinning with the weight of the Alpha King's command. 10 winters, 10 suns. Each word echoed in her thoughts like a drumbeat she could not escape. She had barely slept since her arrival. Every room she passed, every corridor she explored, seemed to hum with unseen life. The portraits of the children haunted her dreams. Their eyes followed her, filled with longing and sorrow. She began to understand that the king's rule was not merely one of power, it was a kingdom trapped under a curse older than memory. As dawn broke, the cold light revealed the true scale of the castle. Frost-coated towers reached toward a sky streaked with gray, and the walls seemed to breathe with age. She found herself in the library, a vast hall of towering shelves, the scent of old parchment filling the air. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, some written in languages she could not read, others etched with strange symbols. She felt a strange pull, as if the stories themselves were calling her. The Alpha King appeared silently behind her, his presence commanding yet quiet, like the still eye of a storm. "You are curious," he said, his voice low, carrying both challenge and amusement. I want to understand this place," she replied. "The castle, the curse, everything. I want to understand." He studied her for a long moment. There was no anger in his gaze, only something deeper. A test, a challenge, and a glimmer of trust he rarely offered. "Few survive the truths hidden here," he said. "Curiosity is dangerous." "I am not afraid," she whispered, though her heart beat rapidly. The words surprised her as much as they startled him. In that moment, she felt the fragile bridge forming between them, not just king and bride, but two souls testing the bounds of understanding. He stepped closer. "You are brave, or foolish," he murmured. "Perhaps both." His eyes darkened, shadows of past winters flickering within them. "The curse that haunts this kingdom is no story for children. The bloodline must be preserved, or the winters will take more than snow, they will take life itself." The bride nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words settle around her. She realized that her life in this castle was no longer her own. She was bound by duty, by fate, and by forces older than she could name. Yet, she also understood that fear would not guide her strength, and understanding might. Over the following days, the castle revealed more of its secrets. She walked through corridors lined with shields and banners, symbols of battles fought and won, and lost. The servants moved quietly, as if the castle itself commanded silence. In the kitchens, she noticed a strange stillness, a weight that hung over every corner, and in the stables, horses snorted softly, their eyes reflecting an intelligence she did not expect. One evening, she wandered into the gardens. Snow covered the statues of past queens, their faces frozen in expressions of dignity and sorrow. Frost clung to the bare branches of ancient trees, turning them into crystalline sculptures. She felt the isolation of the castle keenly here. Away from the warmth of the hearth and the presence of others, a sound made her turn, a soft rustle, almost imperceptible, coming from the shadowed edge of the garden. The Alpha King emerged from the darkness, his cloak brushing the snow, his face unreadable. "You should not wander alone," he said. "I need to see it for myself," she replied. "I need to understand the winters, the curse, everything you have lived with." He nodded, a faint shadow of something like admiration in his eyes. "Very well. But be warned, the castle has its own will. It tests those who tread its halls." As they walked together, she began to notice the subtle signs of magic woven into the very walls and air. Frost seemed to move like water along the stone. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and distant whispers floated on the wind. She realized that the Alpha King's power was not only of rule but of something far older, ancient magic, intertwined with his bloodline. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. "The presence of what came before, the spirits of those who failed." She nodded, shivering, though not entirely from the cold. I feel them. They watch," he said. "They wait, and they remember." For the first time, she saw a crack in his composure. A shadow of grief crossed his face, quickly replaced by the mask of the Alpha King. Yet in that moment, she glimpsed the man behind the crown, the man who had lost much, who had loved and suffered, who carried the weight of winters past in his very soul. You are different, he said softly. Most would flee in fear. But you do not. One, and one. I cannot run, she said. Not now. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, and she felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in her chest. Yet even as she sensed connection, she understood the distance between them, the vast gulf carved by power, duty, and the shadows of the past. In the following days, she began to see hints of rebellion within the castle. Servants whispered of strange sightings, shapes moving in the halls at night, shadows that did not belong, and fleeting figures near the frozen lake outside. The Alpha King remained calm, but the tension in the castle was palpable, a living thing that seemed to coil and tighten with each passing day. One evening, she ventured into the hidden chamber she had glimpsed before. The keyhole glinted faintly in the torchlight, and she felt a pull stronger than curiosity. Her fingers brushed the runes, and the door creaked open to reveal a room filled with relics. Toys frozen in time, small garments stitched with care, and journals written in delicate hand. Each item seemed to hum with memory, with life once lived and now lost. The Alpha King appeared behind her, silently. These are the ghosts of winters past, he said. They remind me of what I have failed to protect and what I must now safeguard. She moved among the relics, her fingers tracing the edges of toys and fabrics. A small, hand-painted figure caught her attention. She held it, feeling a pulse of sorrow and love. They were all children, she whispered. Some did not survive the winters, he said, voice tight. Some were claimed by the curse, others by my own mistakes. The weight of his words pressed on her. She realized that she had married not just a king, but a man bound by grief and haunted by generations of tragedy. She also understood that her own fate, her winters, her children was now intertwined with the echoes of those who had come before. Yet, despite the fear, she felt a spark of resolve. She would endure, she would survive the trials, and perhaps, through understanding and courage, she could help the king heal, even if only a little. That night, she returned to her chamber, the door closing softly behind her. She could not sleep. Thoughts of the Alpha King, the curse, and the winters to come tangled in her mind. She felt the stirrings of an impossible connection, fear and fascination intertwined, a silent promise that neither of them could yet name. A sudden noise drew her to the window. Beyond the frost-covered panes, shadows moved across the courtyard, shapes gliding with unnatural grace. Wolves? Spirits? She could not tell. Her heart leapt. She sensed the presence of something ancient and watchful, aware of her every move. The door to her chamber opened, and the Alpha King stepped inside, silent as the falling snow. His eyes searched hers, dark and unreadable. The castle tests all who dwell within it, he said. Tonight, you will learn what it means to be watched. She met his gaze without flinching. Then let it watch, she said softly. I will not be afraid. A shadow of a smile crossed his lips, brief and fleeting. Perhaps you are stronger than I believed, he murmured. But in the corners of his eyes, she saw concern, worry, and a hint of admiration. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it whispers of long-forgotten winters, of children lost and souls bound to the snow. Inside, the young bride stood, resolute and trembling, caught between fear and fascination, knowing that the coming nights would demand more of her than she had ever imagined. And then, as the first heavy snowflakes of the season began to fall, a distant cry echoed through the castle. A child's voice, faint and sorrowful. She felt her heart tighten. The king's hand, when it rested lightly on her shoulder, was warmer than stone, yet heavier than any she had known. The Alpha King whispered, almost to himself, "They are coming, and you must be ready." She nodded, a shiver running through her. She did not know what awaited them, or whether the winters would bring hope or despair, but she understood one truth. She had stepped into a world of shadows and secrets, and there was no turning back. The winter had begun. Winter had settled like a living thing over the kingdom. Snow fell endlessly, covering the forests, rivers, and villages in a silent, frozen blanket. The wind carried whispers across the hills, voices that seemed to murmur from beyond the grave. Within the castle, the halls felt narrower, the shadows longer. The young bride had grown accustomed to the cold and the quiet, yet the weight of her destiny pressed ever heavier upon her shoulders. The Alpha King moved through the halls with his usual command, yet she noticed cracks in his composure more often now. Nights of restless sleep left dark shadows beneath his eyes, and his stern authority sometimes faltered when he thought no one watched. The bride saw it, the man behind the crown, haunted by the curse and the winters that had claimed so much. On this particular morning, she found him in the castle's armory, standing before the ancient weapons of kings past. His fingers traced the edge of a sword, eyes distant, lost in memory. "You are restless," he said without turning. "I am," she admitted. "The castle, the curse, the shadows, they feel stronger now. I cannot just watch." He finally faced her, his expression unreadable. "You cannot fight what you do not understand," he said. "Yet, you try. That is rare." She stepped closer. "Then teach me. Show me what I must know to survive. And to help you." A flicker of emotion crossed his face, something close to surprise, perhaps even gratitude. "Very well," he said. "Tonight, you will witness the true winter." As dusk fell, the castle became a different place. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, and the wind howled like the voices of 1,000 lost souls. The bride followed him to the courtyard, where snow swirled into thick clouds, making it nearly impossible to see. "Look," he commanded, pointing toward the forest beyond the walls. There, figures moved in the storm wolves with eyes like burning embers, and shadows that slithered between the trees. They did not howl, they did not run, they watched, calculating, aware of every movement. The bride felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. "They are drawn to the curse," the king said softly, "to the power that binds this land. Tonight, you will see why survival demands more than courage." The first figure emerged from the snow. A shadow spirit, dark and shapeless, yet glinting with icy light. Where its eyes should have been, it moved swiftly toward them, and the bride's heart leapt. Her instincts screamed to flee, yet she remained, rooted by the presence of the king. He raised a hand, not to strike, but to summon a barrier of light, a shimmer of frost and magic that formed between them and the creature. The spirit hissed, a sound like cracking ice, and recoiled. "You see," he said, "strength alone is useless. You must combine it with understanding, with wisdom." The bride watched, fascinated and terrified. The castle, the king, the very air around them, it was alive with power. The trials she would face were not of flesh and steel, but of spirit and courage. As the night deepened, the shadow spirits advanced in greater numbers. The king moved with precision and authority, but she saw the strain in his movements. He was powerful, yet even he could be challenged by forces older than memory. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice low and steady, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "Fear will make you weak. Trust yourself. And trust me." She nodded, gripping the edge of her cloak. "I trust you," she whispered. Though the words carried more than mere obedience, they carried hope, and a willingness to stand beside him. The storm raged around them, snowflakes swirling like shards of glass. Shadows lunged and retreated, testing their defenses. The king's power flared, a pulse of light and frost that drove the spirits back. Yet he moved with caution, aware that each strike carried consequences. At one point, a spirit slipped past their defenses and lunged at her. Instinctively, she raised her hand, and a spark of light burst forth, stopping the creature mid-air. She gasped, surprised at the strength within her, a strength she had not known she possessed. The king's eyes widened. "You have power too," he said, voice a mix of astonishment and approval. "The Winters have chosen well. Perhaps you are more than a bride. Perhaps you are a partner. For the first time, she saw a hint of vulnerability in him, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. She realized that the bond between them was shifting, no longer defined solely by command and obedience, but by shared experience and growing trust. The storm intensified. Snow whipped across the courtyard, and the shadow spirits grew more daring, pressing closer with every moment. The king turned to her. "Follow me," he commanded, leading her toward the frozen lake at the edge of the castle grounds. The lake was covered in thick ice, glittering faintly under the pale moonlight. The snow continued to fall, layering the ice with powdery frost. The king knelt, placing his hands upon the surface, and murmured words that seemed older than the castle itself. The ice responded, glowing faintly, creating a barrier that pushed back the shadows. "Together," he said, "we can hold them at bay. But this is only a taste. The winters will grow harsher, the trials greater. You must be ready." She stood beside him, feeling the pulse of magic beneath her hands, and a bond forming in the shared struggle. For the first time, she did not feel like a helpless bride. She felt like a companion, a protector, and perhaps, in time, an equal. The battle lasted until the moon reached its zenith. By then, the spirits had retreated, slipping back into the forest as if the castle itself had commanded them away. The bride and the king stood in silence, the storm dying down, leaving the world blanketed in white. "You have done well," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "Many would have faltered, and many would have fled. But you endured." She looked up at him, seeing not only the Alpha King, but a man shaped by loss, grief, and the endless winters. "We endured together," she said softly. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Endurance is only the beginning," he said. "The winters will demand more. The curse will test us, again and again." Her heart sank slightly, but a fire of determination kindled within her. She would face whatever came, not just for herself, but for him, for the children who had come before, and for the bond forming between them. As they returned to the castle, the bride noticed something strange near the frozen lake, a small figure, barely visible through the snow. A child? A spirit? She could not tell. The figure watched them silently, then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The king noticed her gaze. "The past will always follow," he said. "You must learn to walk with it, or it will consume you." She nodded, understanding that their trials were far from over. The winters had begun in earnest, and the shadows of the past, the curse, and the Alpha King's own fears would continue to test them both. That night, she lay awake in her chamber, listening to the wind, hearing faint whispers carried from the halls and corridors. She thought of the shadow spirits, the frozen lake, and the childlike figure she had glimpsed. And she thought of the king, whose power and vulnerability were intertwined in a way she could not yet fully comprehend. A soft knock at her door made her start. She opened it cautiously, and there he stood, silent, eyes dark and unreadable. "You are learning quickly," he said. "But the true trial is not the shadows outside, nor the magic of the castle. It is what lies within you and within me." She met his gaze steadily. "Then we will face it together," she said. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to vanish, replaced by a shared understanding and unspoken promise. And then, from the shadows of the hall, a cry rang out, a child's voice, faint and sorrowful, yet unmistakable. The bride's pulse quickened. She glanced at the king, who stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "The curse! It awakens," he whispered, almost to himself. The wind howled outside, snow swirling like silver flames. The castle groaned under the weight of winter, and the shadows seemed to pulse with life. She felt the thrill of fear mixed with a strange exhilaration. The trials were only beginning, and the coming nights would demand all that she had, and more. The Alpha King stepped closer, hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of connection. "Prepare yourself," he said softly. "The winters will grow harsher. And the shadows are coming for us both." She nodded, feeling a fire rise within her chest. She would not falter. She would not run. Whatever the winters brought, whatever the curse demanded, she would endure. And perhaps, in the endurance, they might both find something more than survival. They might find redemption, and even hope. And as the snow drifted past the tall windows, a distant cry echoed through the castle, a reminder that the trials were far from over, and that the next winter would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. The true winter had begun. The wind howled louder than ever, carrying snowflakes like shards of silver across the frozen kingdom. The castle trembled under the weight of winter, and the shadows that had tested them for so long now seemed to press in from every corner. The young bride stood beside the Alpha King in the great hall, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, her eyes determined despite the fear rising in her chest. The castle had become a battlefield. Shadow spirits swirled outside the towering windows, their eyes glowing faintly like embers, testing the strength of the barrier the king had summoned. The frozen lake shimmered in the distance, a mirror reflecting the stormy night sky. Every corner of the castle seemed alive, breathing with power both ancient and unseen. "We have reached the final trial," the king said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of exhaustion. "Tonight, the curse itself will confront us. The winters will demand all that we have, or take everything from us." She nodded, gripping the edge of his cloak. "Then we will face it together," she said. Her voice was calm, though her heart raced. She had grown in strength since her arrival, learning to channel courage and insight into every step she took. She understood now that survival would not come from fear, but from understanding, trust, and determination. The shadows gathered more boldly, pressing against the magical barrier surrounding the castle. Figures slipped through gaps in the defenses, shadowy shapes that moved with intelligence and malice. The Alpha King raised his hands, summoning frost and light that clashed with the darkness, pushing back the spirits with force and precision. Yet even he could not repel them all. "Do not hold back," he said, turning to her. "You have power too. Use it." She closed her eyes briefly, drawing on the lessons she had learned. When she opened them, light sparked from her palms. Warm and bright against the icy darkness, she cast it toward the spirits, driving some back, forcing the shadows to retreat. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but she did not falter. The king's eyes softened as he watched her. "You have grown strong," he whispered, almost to himself. "Stronger than I dared to hope." For a moment, the world outside the walls seemed to pause. The snow swirled more slowly. The shadows hesitated, and in that fragile moment, the bride realized the depth of the bond that had formed between them. She was no longer just a bride, she was a partner, a companion in the fight against the curse, and perhaps the first true light the king had felt in countless winters. But the moment of calm shattered as a massive shadow rose above the others. It was taller, darker, and more terrifying than any spirit they had faced before. Its eyes glowed with a pale, cold light, and it moved with deliberate intent toward the castle. "The curse. It has taken form," the king said, his voice tight. "This is its final test." The bride gripped his arm, fear and determination mingling in her chest. "Then we face it together," she said again, her voice unwavering. The creature lunged, and the king met it with a surge of frost magic, his power clashing with the darkness in a dazzling display of light and shadow. The bride followed his lead, casting her own light to reinforce the barrier, feeling it pulse under her hands like a living thing. Together, they moved as one, a harmony of strength and courage that neither had known before. For hours, they battled, pushing back the shadow. Their movements synchronized, their wills united. The castle trembled with the effort, but neither the king nor the bride faltered. Each strike, each wave of energy, drew them closer, not just in purpose, but in heart. Finally, the shadow hesitated, a low, unearthly sound echoing from it. The king's eyes met hers. "Now," he said. "Together." She extended her hands, and a brilliant surge of light poured forth, merging with the king's frost and magic. The shadow shrieked, twisting and writhing as the combined force drove it back. The darkness fragmented, scattering like shattered glass across the snow. The winter storm outside began to waver, the snowflakes falling slower, lighter. For the first time in what seemed like eternity, the castle felt still. The shadows had retreated, the curse broken or at least held at bay. Exhausted but exhilarated, the bride and the king stood side by side, breathing in the quiet, feeling the bond between them solidify. The king turned to her, his eyes no longer sharp with command but soft, almost vulnerable. "You have done what I could not alone," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "You have endured, and you have fought beside me. You are no ordinary bride." She smiled faintly, warmth blossoming in her chest despite the chill. "I could not have done it without you," she said, "and I would not want to face it without you." For a long moment, they simply stood together, the snow settling around them like a gentle promise. The bond they had forged in fear, struggle, and shared trials had become something deeper: trust, understanding, and a fragile but growing affection. The king's expression shifted, a mixture of awe and something unspoken. "Perhaps the winters were meant to bring you to me," he said softly. "Perhaps the curse was never only about loss. Perhaps it was about finding something worth fighting for." 2-3. Her heart quickened at the words. She understood now that the trials, the shadow spirits, the frozen castle, and the curse itself had all shaped them, not only testing their strength, but revealing their hearts. She had grown braver, wiser, and more aware of the depth of the man beside her. "The winters may still come," she said, her voice steady, "but I will not fear them. Not while we face them together." A faint smile touched his lips, and he reached out to take her hand, a gesture of trust and connection that spoke louder than any command. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "the curse can no longer claim us. Perhaps we can define our own winters now." The snow outside began to thaw slightly, as if the land itself responded to the breaking of the shadow, and the bond formed between them. Light shimmered through the frost-covered windows, painting the walls in a soft, golden hue. The castle, once a fortress of fear and sorrow, felt warmer, alive in a way it had not for centuries. That night, they walked through the castle together, their hands intertwined, the weight of the past lifted, if only slightly. The bride felt a peace she had not known since her arrival. She had faced fear, magic, and shadows, and she had emerged stronger. And beside her, the king, once distant, cold, and commanding, now shared in that strength. Transformed by the trust and courage she had shown, they reached the balcony overlooking the frozen valley, snowflakes drifting around them like tiny sparks of light. The wind had softened, and the night seemed still, almost serene. The bride gazed out at the world, realizing how far she had come, not just in surviving the winters, but in finding her place in this kingdom, in the life of the Alpha King, and perhaps in the future they could build together. The king stood beside her, silent for a moment, then whispered, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the intimacy of shared trials. "The winters will still come. The shadows may rise again, but now, I fear nothing, for you are my heart." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight, her own heart full. "And you are mine," she replied softly. For the first time, the castle seemed not a place of fear and sorrow, but a home shaped by courage, trust, and the bond forged in the harshest of winters. The bride and the king, bound by destiny and strengthened by trial, stood together, facing the night with hearts aligned, ready for whatever the future might hold. And though the winds continued to whistle through the towers, and the shadows would always linger at the edges of the kingdom, neither the bride nor the king felt alone. They had survived the winters, They had faced the curse, and they had found in each other a light that even the coldest frost could not extinguish. The first winter had ended. The curse had been challenged, and the Alpha King and his bride, hand in hand, watched the first hints of dawn break over a kingdom finally ready to heal. But even as the light spread across the snow-covered land, a faint whisper echoed through the castle halls, soft, distant, yet certain. The winters are only beginning. And with that, the bride squeezed the king's hand, her heart steady. Whatever the future held, they would face it together.